While the world is riveted on Israel's heroic, necessary war against the evil Iranian regime, the U.S. must not undermine Ukraine. Hello, I'm Steve Forbes, and this is What's Ahead, where you get the insights you need to better navigate these turbulent times. The next few weeks will profoundly affect the future security of the U.S. and the free world. The immediate question is whether the Israelis, with appropriate American support, will fully finish off Iran's nuclear program, including the elimination of the mullah's ballistic missiles and missile launchers, as well as the regime's capacity to manufacture drones.
Welcome back to America First. If you believe in putting America's interests first in every foreign policy decision, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to stay informed on the issues that matter most to our nation's future. Today I'm reacting to a recent video from Steve Forbes where he makes the case for continued American involvement in both the Middle East and Ukraine.
Nothing less will do. Before the Israeli attacks, the Trump administration was making unsettling noises that it might agree to let Iran continue with a supposedly peaceful program of uranium enrichment, while the Ayatollahs pretended to wind down its nuclear bomb efforts. Thankfully, that now looks to be out the window. The mullahs are not businessmen out to cut a good financial deal. They want the blood of those they consider unbelievers, including the annihilation of Israel. Chatter about negotiations now should be just a distraction to the fundamental task at hand, that is, obliterating Iran's nuclear efforts once and for all. Israel should also not be hindered in dealing decisively with Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and other Iranian proxies. Xi Jinping and our own allies will be looking closely to see if the U.S. has the backbone and strategic wisdom to credibly counter China and our other adversaries. This brings us to another crucial test: Ukraine. Too many policymakers and onlookers seem oblivious to the strategic importance of the war raging there. Washington has a history of profoundly misjudging the character of Vladimir Putin. He can be charming and seemingly sincerely interested in working with other leaders, especially American presidents. Before he belatedly woke up to the true Putin, President George W. Bush declared, quote, "I looked the man in the eye. I found him to be very straightforward and trustworthy. I was able to get a sense of his soul," end quote. Bush's successors haven't been much better. Despite blunders and Russian casualties now approaching 1 million men, Putin believes he can win this war. He's convinced that his meat grinder offensives will wear down the Ukrainians and get more and more territory. These gains, Putin thinks, will lead Washington to taper off crucial weapons from the U.S. and NATO. The U.S. will effectively wash its hands of Ukraine. Such an abandonment would be a strategic catastrophe on the scale of the 1938 Munich Agreement, when Britain and France threw over Czechoslovakia to Adolf Hitler. President Trump's persistent wooing of Putin fans these concerns. His remarking that the G7 should be the G8 with Russia brought back into this exclusive club, or even the G9 with China in as well, and his saying that Putin can play a role in generating a deal between Israel and Iran stirred deep anxieties. The correct course is clear: help Israel do what needs to be done with the Ayatollahs and sufficiently arm Ukraine to thwart Putin's imperial designs. Then the world will be a safer, better place. I'm Steve Forbes. Thanks for...
While I respect Forbes as a businessman and conservative voice, I have some serious concerns about his foreign policy prescriptions that I need to address from an America First perspective. Let me start with where Forbes and I agree. Iran absolutely poses a threat, not just to Israel, but to American interests in the region. The Iranian regime has been hostile to America for over 4 decades, and their nuclear ambitions represent a legitimate security concern. When Forbes talked about Iran's leadership being ideological extremists rather than rational business partners, he's absolutely correct. This is a regime that chants death to America and has funded terrorism against American personnel and allies for generations. However, where I part ways with Forbes is on the extent of American involvement required to address this threat. Forbes calls for the United States to provide appropriate American support for Israel to eliminate Iran's nuclear program. But what does that actually mean for American taxpayers and American blood? We've already provided Israel with billions in military aid, advanced weapon systems, and intelligence sharing. Israel is a capable military power with one of the most advanced air forces in the world. They have the capability to defend themselves without American forces being directly involved in another Middle Eastern conflict. The America First position is clear. We support our allies, but we don't fight their wars for them. We spent over 2 decades in the Middle East, lost thousands of American lives, and spent trillions of dollars with very little to show for it except more instability and more enemies. Israel has legitimate security concerns, but they also have a means to address those concerns. Our role should be limited to intelligence sharing and defensive weapon sales, not guaranteeing American military intervention. Now let's talk about Ukraine, where Forbes really loses me. He compares potential American withdrawal from Ukraine to the Munich Agreement of 1938, essentially arguing that not continuing to fund the Ukrainian war effort would be equivalent to appeasing Hitler. This is a kind of historical analogy that sounds dramatic but falls apart under scrutiny. First, let's talk about the numbers. Forbes mentions that Russian casualties are approaching 1 million men. Think about that for a moment. We're talking about a meat grinder that has consumed potentially 1 million lives, and Forbes wants America to continue feeding this conflict with weapons and money. How is prolonging this bloodbath in America's interest? Ukraine is not a NATO member. Ukraine is not a formal American ally. Ukraine has never been vital to American security interests. Yet we've already sent over $100 billion to support their war effort. That's more than we've spent on many domestic priorities. Meanwhile, we have a border crisis, an inflation crisis, and infrastructure that's falling apart. How do we justify spending hundreds of billions on a foreign conflict when Americans are struggling at home? Forbes argues that Putin believes he can win through attrition and that this will somehow embolden China and other adversaries. But here's what he doesn't consider. Every dollar we spend in Ukraine, every weapon system we send there, every diplomatic capital we expend on this conflict is a dollar, weapon, and diplomatic effort that we can't use to counter China in the Pacific, where our actual vital interests lie. China is our real strategic competitor. China threatens Taiwan, which actually matters to American economic interests given the semiconductor supply chain. China is building military bases throughout the Pacific and challenging American naval supremacy in waters that have been crucial to our security since World War II. Yet we're burning through our weapons stockpiles and treasury in Eastern Europe while China grows stronger. The America First approach to Ukraine is simple. This is a European problem that requires a European solution. Germany has the largest economy in Europe. France has nuclear weapons. Britain has one of the world's most capable militaries. If Ukraine matters so much to European security, then Europeans should be the ones primarily funding and arming Ukrainian resistance. Why should American taxpayers bear the primary burden for defending Europe's eastern border? Forbes also criticizes President Trump's suggestions about bringing Russia back into international forums or having Putin play a role in Middle East negotiations. But this misses the point entirely. Diplomacy isn't about rewarding good behavior. It's about advancing American interests. If Putin can be useful in resolving conflicts that drain American resources, then engaging with him serves our purposes. We negotiated with Stalin during World War II not because we like communism, but because it served our strategic interests. The fundamental question that Forbes and other foreign policy establishment figures refuse to address is this. What are America's vital national interests, and how do we prioritize them with limited resources? We cannot be the world's policemen, fighting every battle and solving every problem. We tried that approach for the past 30 years, and it gave us endless wars, massive debt, and more enemies than we started with. America's vital interests are clear: securing our borders, maintaining economic prosperity, countering China's rise in the Pacific, and ensuring that no hostile power can threaten the American homeland. Everything else is secondary. Supporting allies is important, but not when it comes to the expense of our primary security concerns. On Iran, the America First position is that we should absolutely prevent them from acquiring nuclear weapons, but through sanctions, diplomatic pressure, and support for regional allies rather than direct military intervention. We should make it clear that any Iranian attack on American interests will be met with overwhelming retaliation, but we shouldn't be looking for excuses to start another Middle Eastern war. On Ukraine, We should encourage a negotiated settlement that ends a bloodshed and allows us to refocus on the China challenge. This doesn't mean abandoning Ukraine entirely, but it means being realistic about what American involvement can achieve and what it costs us in terms of resources and strategic focus. Forbes mentions that our allies are watching to see if America has the backbone to counter our adversaries. But here's what they're really watching. They're watching to see if America is foolish enough to keep bearing the cost of their security while they free ride on our military spending. European NATO members have been underspending on defense for decades because they know America will pick up the slack. Our Middle Eastern allies have been dragging us into their regional conflicts because they know we'll show up with checkbooks and weapon systems. Real American strength means being selective about our commitments and ruthless about prioritizing our interests. It means telling our allies that they need to step up and take responsibility for their own neighborhoods. It means focusing our military and economic power on challenges that actually threaten American prosperity and security. The foreign policy establishment has been wrong about almost everything for the past 20 years. They promised us that invading Iraq would bring democracy to the Middle East. They assured us that nation building in Afghanistan would create a stable ally. They told us that NATO expansion wouldn't provoke Russia. They've been consistently wrong, yet they keep demanding that we follow their advice into the next disaster. Patriots, the choice is clear. We can continue down the path of endless foreign commitments, endless spending on other people's problems, and endless wars that serve everyone's interests except America's. Or we can choose a foreign policy that puts America first, focuses on our vital interests, and lets other countries solve their own problems. That doesn't mean isolationism. It means selective engagement based on clear-eyed assessment of American interests. It means maintaining the strongest military in the world, but using it primarily to deter threats to America rather than to solve every global problem. It means supporting allies when it serves our purposes, but not writing blank checks for their security. Forbes and others in the foreign policy establishment will call this approach dangerous or naive. They'll invoke historical analogies and warn about American credibility. But credibility isn't maintained by fighting every battle. It's maintained by being strong enough to win the battles that actually matter and wise enough to avoid the ones that don't. The real test of American leadership in the coming years won't be whether we can manage conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East simultaneously. It will be whether we can maintain our economic and military superiority over China while keeping our own society free and prosperous. That's the challenge that will determine whether America remains a great power or follows Britain into managed decline. So, what do you think, Patriots? Are we better served by following the establishment playbook of endless foreign commitments, or should we chart a new course that puts America's interests first? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to America First for more content that puts our nation's interests ahead of the global elite's agenda. Until next time, keep fighting for America.